Have you ever wondered why someone who used to cheer you on suddenly goes silent when things start going right in your life? Or why certain people grow cold, distant, or even bitter when you finally begin to find peace? It's not always because of what you did wrong. Sometimes it's because you're finally doing things right, and they don't know how to handle it. There's a moment in your life when the room starts to feel different. The energy shifts. People who once supported you start keeping their distance. They used to check in, laugh with you, root for you, but now it's quiet, cold, unspoken. You might find yourself wondering what changed. The truth is, it might not be what you said or what you did. It might simply be who you're becoming. When you start to grow, to heal, to evolve, people notice. And not everyone is comfortable with that. Growth is like holding up a mirror, not just to your own reflection, but to everyone else around you. Your progress highlights their stagnation. Your courage reveals their fear, and your discipline exposes their distractions. It doesn't mean you're trying to be better than anyone. It just means you're no longer pretending to be smaller than you are. Some people were deeply invested in the version of you that didn't know their worth. The version that questioned everything, that bent over backwards, that stayed quiet to avoid conflict. That version made them feel needed, in control, secure. But the moment you began to step into your purpose, to walk with clarity and confidence, something shifted. You became a disruption to their comfort zone. This shift often happens silently. One day, you're laughing with them. The next, you feel the air grow tense. Their words become fewer, their gaze a little colder, their support just absent. And it's confusing, because you're doing better. You're not breaking. You're not hiding. You're not settling. You're finally rising. And that rising, it threatens everything they've refused to confront in themselves. The truth is, your growth forces others to face what they've buried. And not everyone is ready for that. Some people don't want to grow. They've made peace with their fear, their compromise, their cycles. So when your life begins to reflect what they gave up on, it doesn't inspire them, it offends them, it makes them feel behind. And rather than face those uncomfortable truths, they do what's easier. They pull away, they criticize, they resent. But hear this, it's not your job to shrink just to make someone else feel tall. It's not your responsibility to hold yourself back so others can feel safe. What's happening isn't personal, it's spiritual. When God's hand is on your life, when He starts guiding you into places your past tried to disqualify you from, people will react. Some will celebrate, others will stay silent. A few may even hate. But their reaction does not define your value. You see, people are often more comfortable with your pain than with your progress. They were happy to kneel with you in the valley, but they vanish when you start climbing the mountain. Why? Because pain creates connection. But purpose brings conviction. It speaks to the dreams they've buried, the callings they've ignored, the parts of themselves they've silenced. And that's not something everyone wants to deal with. Your transformation isn't a betrayal. It's not a rejection of the people who were once part of your story. It's simply the natural result of becoming who you were meant to be. And that version of you, the healed, focused, unapologetic version, doesn't settle anymore. That version doesn't perform. That version doesn't stay in boxes or beg for belonging. That version walks in truth, and not everyone can walk with truth. You may be tempted to explain, to justify, to reach back, but you don't have to. You don't have to perform anymore. You don't owe anyone a front row seat to your evolution, especially if they're only watching to criticize. Let them wonder, let them wrestle. You keep walking, you keep growing, because there's a cost to growth, and sometimes it's people. Not everyone is assigned to your next season. Some were only ever meant to be a part of your survival, not your success. And when you realize that, it hurts deeply. Losing people who once felt like home is one of the hardest parts of healing, but it's also one of the most necessary. Let them leave. Let them distance themselves. Their departure, not your defeat, it's your deliverance. God removes to make room. And what feels like loss is often preparation. You're not losing them. You're gaining clarity. You're gaining alignment. You're stepping into purpose. So the next time someone pulls away without a reason, the next time their support turns into silence, pause. Don't panic. Don't chase. Ask yourself, what version of me did they love that I've outgrown? And then bless that version and bless them too. Release it all with grace. Because the future waiting for you is not built on old attachments, it's built on divine direction. And when God starts shifting your circle, it's because He's elevating growth that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with fanfare, applause, or public recognition. It comes quietly, through prayer, through healing, through surrender. You begin to let go of what once defined you, not because you hate who you were, but because you're ready to become who God created you to be. And in that becoming, not everyone will understand. Not everyone will stay. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones never spoken aloud. They come in the form of unread messages, cancelled plans, or a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes anymore. You feel the distance, but there's no confrontation, just a slow fade. And you wonder, did I change too much? Did I do something wrong? But no, you just changed enough to no longer fit where you used to belong. You didn't grow to hurt them. You grew because healing required it. You didn't rise to leave them behind. You rose because God called you higher. And those who were meant to climb with you would have found the strength to do so. But some chose comfort over calling, familiarity over faith, fear over forward. So don't mistake their silence as a sign that you've failed. Often, it's confirmation that you're on the right path. There's a tension that comes with elevation. Not everyone can breathe the air at higher altitudes. And that's okay. God never intended for everyone to follow you into every season. Some people were assignments for a time, not companions for a lifetime. The ones who truly love you, who are aligned with your purpose, will not be intimidated by your healing. They won't mislabel your confidence as arrogance. They won't call your boundaries selfish. They'll see your growth and be inspired to grow too. Because real love doesn't resent transformation. It honors it. But there will be others. People who once clapped when you stumbled because your pain made them feel stronger. People who whispered encouragement in your weakness, but now speak nothing in your strength. These are the ones who loved the version of you that didn't know how to say no, that tolerated disrespect, that prioritized everyone else's peace over your own. Now that you've found your voice, they feel silenced. Now that you've found your footing, they feel lost, because their identity was built around your chaos. And now that you've chosen calm, they don't know who they are without your confusion to define them. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to keep walking. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean distance, it means strength. You're no longer explaining your journey to people committed to misunderstanding it. You've stopped trying to translate your purpose into a language they refuse to hear. And that's power. Because every moment you spend defending your light is a moment stolen from the mission God placed in front of you. Let them think what they want. Let them assume. Let them fill in the blanks with stories that make them feel more comfortable in your absence. Because the truth is, your absence might just be the loudest presence you've ever had. You're not gone. You're just no longer accessible to the version of them that can't handle who you've become. Growth has a way of filtering the room. The ones still standing beside you, they're not there by accident. They're there because they were refined with you, not repelled by your refinement. They were forged in fire, not frightened by it. And if some had to leave for that clarity to come, then so be it. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to curse them. You simply have to release them. With grace, with gratitude, and without bitterness. Because holding on to what no longer fits only delays what God is trying to bring. The next chapter of your life doesn't need everyone from the last one. It just needs your full obedience. And yes, some of those who walked away might eventually return. But by the time they do, you'll have changed too much to go back. Not because you're unforgiving, but because you've finally realized your worth. You've finally realized that shrinking yourself to be loved isn't love. It's fear. And you were not created to live in fear. You were created to live in freedom. So if you feel misunderstood, misjudged, or even hated for your transformation, breathe. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're not the problem. You're just growing. And sometimes growth looks like grief. Grieving the old you. Grieving the old circles. Grieving the comfort of being accepted for a version of yourself that no longer exists. But as you let go, you make room. Room for peace. Room for purpose. room for divine connection, the kind that doesn't need explanation, the kind that doesn't flinch when you evolve, the kind that says, I see who you're becoming and I'm becoming too. Let them talk, let them question, let them label, but don't stop moving, because every step you take toward healing is a step toward destiny. And destiny doesn't wait for approval, it waits for obedience. So walk, even if you have to walk alone for a while, even if the silence gets heavy, even if the love you gave is not returned. Walk, because what's ahead is worth begin to see the pattern not as rejection, but as redirection. What once felt like abandonment, you now recognize as protection. God wasn't punishing you by pulling people away. He was preserving the version of you that could finally step into purpose without apology. You didn't lose them. You outgrew the season where they had access to you. And that outgrowing is sacred. It doesn't come with noise. It doesn't come with closure. It comes in the quiet places where you learn that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity. It's when you stop begging to be understood and start resting in the understanding that God knows your heart, your story, your calling, and that's enough. Because truthfully, not everyone was cheering for your rise. Some were only clapping as long as you stayed beneath them. They were comfortable as long as your light didn't outshine their shadow. But the moment your confidence began to grow louder than your doubt, the applause stopped. Not because you changed for the worse, but because you changed for the better, and they couldn't come with you. This is when you learn, not all loyalty is pure, not all closeness is love. Some connections were simply convenience wrapped in emotion. And once you stop being convenient, once your growth becomes inconvenient, they vanish. Let them, because your worth was never tied to their consistency. It was defined long before they arrived, and it will remain long after they're gone. There is strength in walking away from what no longer aligns. And sometimes silence is the most faithful step you can take. Not to punish, not to provoke, but to protect what God is building inside you. You are not called to live in confusion. You are not required to stay in spaces that drain your spirit. And you are never obligated to explain a transformation that God Himself initiated. The ones who truly love you will not need to be convinced of your change. They'll recognize it, they'll honor it, and they'll grow with you. Because love that's rooted in truth is not intimidated by growth, it's inspired by it. But those who cannot face their own reflections will reject yours. When your discipline makes them uncomfortable, they'll call it control. When your healing challenges their wounds, they'll call it fake. When your boundaries remove their access, they'll call you cold. Not because it's true, but because it's easier to criticize your growth than confront their lack of it. Let them say what they need to say. Let them think what they need to think. Your purpose is not in their hands. Your joy does not depend on their validation. And your peace was never theirs to protect. When you finally stop performing, stop defending, stop shrinking, something beautiful happens. You remember who you are. Not the version shaped by fear, not the one molded by approval, but the one formed in truth, in love, in fire, the version God always saw, even when you didn't. And that version walks with a quiet strength, not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. You don't have to explain your light, just let it shine. Let your life speak for you, let your peace preach for you. Let your actions testify. Because people can argue with opinions, but they cannot argue with fruit. When your life starts bearing fruit, real fruit, some people will grow silent, others will grow distant, and a few may grow hostile. But don't misinterpret their reaction as a sign you're off track. Sometimes resistance is proof that you're finally aligned, that the seeds you've sown in tears are beginning to bloom in purpose. And that bloom will expose everything still living in shadow. Keep blooming anyway. Keep showing up, keep forgiving, keep praying, keep creating, keep choosing love when bitterness would be easier. Keep drawing boundaries when chaos calls for your attention, because the path ahead will require the healed version of you, not the one who made everyone else comfortable. You don't have to apologize for becoming. You don't have to explain why you stopped responding, stopped explaining, stopped overextending. You're not being distant, you're being delivered. And the freedom you're walking in is worth more than the approval you used to crave. Let them mislabel you. Let them wonder. Let them talk behind closed doors. Because the door God is opening for you, it doesn't require their understanding, only your obedience. And as you move forward, lighter, freer, more focused, remember this: healing is not a straight path. It comes with grief, with solitude, with lonely nights and honest prayers. But every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you choose growth over approval, heaven rejoices. Because you're not just breaking cycles, you're birthing legacy. So if the room gets quieter, let it. If the circle gets smaller, let it. If the voices fade, let them. You are not alone. You are not behind. You are not too much. You are exactly where you're meant to be, becoming who you were always meant to become. And the people meant for you'll stop grieving the loss of people who couldn't love the version of you that healed. You'll look back and realize they weren't meant to walk with you to where you're going. They were only assigned to who you used to be. And that's not rejection. That's revelation. That's clarity disguised as heartbreak. That's God removing what could no longer stay hidden. You see, healing doesn't just restore you. It reveals everything around you. It brings light to relationships built on your brokenness. It exposes conversations that were never really honest. It peels back the surface to show where love was conditional, where loyalty had limits, and where proximity didn't equal alignment. And that hurts, but it also frees you. Because now you no longer have to guess. You don't have to keep questioning if they would have stayed if you hadn't grown. You know, and knowing allows you to stop reaching for doors that God has already closed. It allows you to stop watering gardens in soil that can't sustain your roots, and it gives you permission to move forward without guilt. Some will say you've changed, and they'll be right. You've changed in the best way possible. You no longer settle. You no longer say yes when your spirit says no. You no longer confuse connection with calling. And you no longer believe that love requires you to lose yourself. You've learned that love, real love, doesn't shrink you. It expands you. It challenges you. It celebrates you without needing you to be less. The irony is, many of those who now feel threatened by your growth were the same ones who prayed for your breakthrough. But they were only prepared for the version of you that would stay beneath them. When the breakthrough actually came, when the light actually turned on, when you actually stepped into who you were made to be, they didn't know how to handle it. Because deep down, they weren't cheering for your freedom. They were cheering for their comfort. And your freedom disrupted that. You became harder to predict, harder to control, harder to access. And for people who only loved you when you were easy to reach, that shift felt personal. But it wasn't. It was purposeful. You weren't trying to hurt them. You were just trying to heal. And healing is loud, even in silence. It speaks without words. It reveals without confrontation. It causes reactions from people who were never ready to confront their own unhealed places. So when you hear them say you've become distant, understand this. Your distance isn't abandonment, it's alignment. You're not walking away in bitterness. You're walking forward in obedience. You're no longer performing in relationships where love was a transaction. You're no longer keeping seats at your table for people who only came to eat, not to serve. You're no longer explaining your value to people who chose not to see it. That kind of clarity comes with cost. The cost is not always financial or visible. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's the weight of being misunderstood. Sometimes it's the ache of standing alone. But that ache, it won't last forever. Because in that space, the space where people fall away, God brings the ones who are meant to stay. The ones who don't flinch at your fire, who don't run from your boundaries, who don't call your light too much. You learn that loneliness is not the absence of people, it's the absence of alignment. And when you find alignment, you'll never settle for anything less again. You'll stop chasing people who walk away. You'll stop begging for love in places that only offered you tolerance. And you'll stop apologizing for being the version of you that finally knows peace. Because peace doesn't require validation. Peace doesn't need permission. Peace doesn't scream or defend. It just is. It settles you, grounds you, and elevates you all at the same time. So when the next wave of silence comes, let it. When the distance grows, let it. When the circle shrinks, let it. These aren't signs of loss, they're signs of refinement. You're not being punished, you're being positioned for deeper purpose, for truer connection, for richer faith. You're becoming someone your past self only dreamed of being. Someone whole, someone bold, someone deeply rooted in who they are in God. And not everyone is ready to meet that version of you. That's okay. They weren't assigned to the next chapter, but the ones who are, they're coming, and they won't be drawn to your brokenness. They'll be drawn to your strength. Until then, keep walking. Even if your voice trembles, even if your heart aches, even if the silence around you feels deafening, keep walking. Because where God is leading you requires less noise and more faith, less crowds and more clarity, less applause and more anointing. The ones who walked away taught you something. They taught you that love without truth isn't love, that proximity without support isn't friendship, that presence without peace isn't worth keeping. And most of all, they taught you how to stand, how to choose yourself, how to choose God, how to rise when you were expected to stay small. So let them say you've changed. You did. Real growth changes everything, not just within you, but around you. It rearranges your environment, redefines your relationships, and resets your reality. It's like walking out of a fog and realizing how long you lived with limited vision. You begin to see people and patterns more clearly. You recognize manipulation where you once saw care. You sense control where you once believed loyalty existed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's why healing is both beautiful and brutal. It brings peace, yes, but it also brings pain. The pain of clarity, the pain of letting go, the pain of walking away from what you thought would always stay. But holding on to things God has called you to release will always cost more than you can afford. Peace requires surrender, and surrender sometimes looks like silence, like letting them believe what they want, like choosing not to argue, not to explain, not to plead your case. You begin to learn that explanations don't change closed minds, that truth doesn't need to shout to be true, that peace is often misunderstood by people who thrive on chaos. And in that learning, you stop fighting battles that aren't yours. You stop chasing people who chose to leave. You stop exhausting yourself trying to be enough for people who were never called to carry your heart. There's freedom in that, in letting go without bitterness, in releasing without resentment, in blessing those who broke you, not because they were right, but because you're finally free. You no longer need closure, you have peace. You no longer need apologies, you have perspective. You no longer need validation, you know your worth. And that kind of knowing, it changes how you move. You stop entering rooms looking for acceptance. You walk in already accepted by the one who matters most. You stop bending your boundaries to avoid being alone. You start realizing that solitude with God is more fulfilling than company without purpose. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. You start shining, not to be seen, but because you finally understand that light is who you are. And yes, that light will make some people uncomfortable. It will expose things they've hidden. It will confront truths they've ignored. It will reveal places they've refused to heal. And their reaction won't always be kind. But their discomfort isn't your responsibility. Your job is not to make others feel okay about staying stagnant. Your job is to grow, to rise, to obey, even when it's lonely. Because obedience isn't always applauded. Sometimes it's misunderstood. Sometimes it's mocked. Sometimes it's met with silence. But heaven doesn't need applause to approve you. God doesn't require consensus to call you. And the next level of your purpose can't wait for the people who refused to grow with you. So you move forward, even with tears in your eyes, even with questions in your heart, even with a circle that looks smaller than it used to. You move forward because God is leading. And where He leads, He provides. He restores, He redeems. He replaces what was lost with what was always meant. And when that happens, when you stop looking back and start living forward, you'll see it clearly. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was a setup, a sacred pause before divine release. Everything that left, every person who walked, every conversation that faded, none of it was random. It was preparation for a life that no longer revolves around approval, for a faith that no longer depends on feelings, for a purpose that no longer pauses for applause. You are stepping into something bigger, deeper, holier. And the space that feels empty now, it's about to overflow with the right presence, the right purpose, the right peace. This is the season where you stop proving and start becoming. where you stop explaining and start living, where you stop chasing and start choosing. You choose wholeness. You choose quiet. You choose truth, even when it costs you people, positions, or platforms. You've learned to trust the pruning. You've seen how God removes to refine. You've felt the sting of release, but you've also felt the strength it leaves behind. And now you know, if it had to end, it wasn't meant to stay. If they had to go, they weren't meant to grow with you. If it had to break, it wasn't built on truth. So you stop mourning what God has already moved. You stop begging for what's already been replaced in heaven's design. You stop fearing the silence and start seeing it for what it really is. Sacred space. Space for you to breathe, to rebuild. To hear God without distraction, to live aligned, even if it means living misunderstood. Because what's coming is greater than what was. And who you're becoming is worth every loss that growth required. So walk on. Quietly, boldly, peacefully walk on. Not because everyone agrees, not because everyone stayed, but because God is. You'll look back and realize the silence was one of the greatest gifts God ever gave you. In the stillness, you stopped striving. In the distance, you stopped performing. And in the solitude, you started hearing the voice that truly matters, His. Not the voices of critics, not the whispers of insecurity, not the noise of old expectations, but the steady, loving voice of your Creator, reminding you who you are and what you were made for. That's when everything begins to shift. Not outwardly at first, but inwardly, at the level of identity. You no longer walk into relationships wondering if you're enough. You walk in full, with nothing to prove and everything to give. You no longer tolerate half love or convenience labeled as friendship. You honor your space, your time, your heart. You finally realize that protection is not rejection, it's strategy. God wasn't keeping people away to hurt you. He was guarding your becoming, because becoming is sacred. It requires pruning, pressing, quiet. It demands that you detach from who you were so you can step fully into who you're meant to be. And that process is uncomfortable. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone is meant to. And the truth is, not everyone can handle your transformation. Some people only loved you when you were unsure. Some people only stayed when you were struggling. And now that you're healing, now that you're confident, now that you're not seeking their approval, they're gone. Let them go. Don't curse them. Don't resent them. Don't carry them into places they were never meant to enter. Your future doesn't need their permission, and your calling doesn't require their applause. God already approved you. Heaven already appointed you. So stop mourning what was and start embracing what is. This is the season where your silence speaks. It testifies that you no longer need to be seen to feel secure, that you no longer need to be heard to know your value. Your absence from the wrong spaces is making room for your presence in the right ones. And your refusal to chase what walked away is positioning you to receive what's walking toward you. Because something is coming. Something that fits who you've become. Something that honors the battles you've fought in private. Something that doesn't demand you shrink or explain. Something that says, I see you, the healed you, the called you, the focused you, and I'm not afraid of your light. God is aligning it. Every connection, every opportunity, every door, it's being prepared for the version of you that finally knows peace. So be patient. Don't rush back into the noise just because silence feels unfamiliar. Don't reopen doors God gently closed. Don't settle just to feel surrounded. Trust the tension. Trust the quiet. Trust that what's being built in silence will speak louder than anything you could say with words. And when the time comes, you'll realize you didn't lose anything. You gained everything that mattered. You gained clarity. You gained purpose. You gained the kind of peace that doesn't flinch when misunderstood. The kind of strength that doesn't bend to opinion. The kind of joy that isn't dependent on who stays or who leaves. Because this journey, it was never about them. It was about you, about the person you were always becoming beneath the expectations, beneath the noise, beneath the need to be liked. You've stepped into that person now, fully, fearlessly, quietly. And though some may never understand your silence, they'll feel it. They'll feel the weight of a peace they can't explain, the authority of a confidence they can't shake, the power of a presence that no longer begs to be seen. Let them wonder. Let them assume, let them sit in their stories. You've moved on, not with bitterness, but with grace. not with anger, but with wisdom. Not with pride, but with purpose. Because what you carry now is too important to be entangled with what no longer aligns. So walk with your head high and your heart light. You're not who you were. Thank God. You're not where you've been. Praise Him. And you're not going back. Not for approval, not for comfort, not for closure. You are moving forward, covered, called, chosen, and final about the kind of freedom that isn't loud or flashy, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it's rooted, anchored, undeniable. You've entered that space now. Not because life became easier, but because you became stronger. You stopped needing permission to be whole. You stopped apologizing for peace. You stopped explaining why you no longer show up where chaos used to call you. And in that shift, you've become everything the old version of you once prayed for. You've learned that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's worship. It's trusting God more than you trust your emotions. It's choosing obedience over familiarity. It's saying, even if I'm misunderstood, even if I'm misjudged, I will still walk where God calls me. That kind of obedience will cost you, but it will also crown you. Because on the other side of surrender is glory you never imagined. You've also discovered that peace doesn't always come wrapped in ease. Sometimes it comes wrapped in grief, in letting go of people you love, in grieving connections you thought would last forever, in mourning the version of yourself who tolerated things out of fear of being alone, of not being enough, of disappointing others. But now you know that fear was lying to you. You were never too much, you were just in the wrong rooms. And now that God has brought you out of those spaces, don't look back. Don't question whether the silence means you've done something wrong. Sometimes, silence is what heaven sounds like when God is fighting battles you can't see. Sometimes it's how He clears the stage so only the right voices can enter. Sometimes it's His way of saying, let me do what only I can do. You've already seen the fruit of obedience. You've already tasted the strength that comes from stillness. You've already experienced the power of restraint, of not defending yourself, not clapping back, not chasing closure. And in that restraint, you've found something most people never do: rest. Not the kind that comes from vacations or moments of escape, but the kind that lives deep in your soul. A rest that says, even if no one claps, even if no one agrees, I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. That kind of rest can't be stolen. It can't be shaken. It doesn't crumble under criticism. It doesn't depend on crowds. It stands tall when you're alone. It stands firm when you're doubted. It stands true when you're whispered about. Because that rest comes from knowing you didn't get here by accident. You got here by grace. Carried, protected, led, even through pain, even through loss. So no, you're not going backward. You're not revisiting old wounds to explain your healing. You're not reopening conversations with people committed to misunderstanding your heart. You've tried that. You gave them access. You gave them time. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. And still they couldn't receive who you were becoming. Not everyone can, because becoming costs, and not everyone wants to pay the price. But you did. You chose the narrow road. You chose to say yes when it was easier to say nothing. You chose to grow when comfort was calling. You chose to listen to God's whisper over the world's applause. And for that, there is a reward. Maybe not everyone sees it yet. Maybe not everyone will. But heaven sees. Heaven knows. And what is being formed in you in the silence, in the shadows, in the solitude, will soon be seen in the light. Not because you'll demand attention, but because fruit always shows. And when it does, don't apologize. Don't shrink back. Don't dim your joy to make others comfortable. Remember what it cost you to get here. Remember what you had to walk away from. Remember who you had to become. And let that remembrance keep you grounded, humble, grateful, focused. Because this is just the beginning. The shedding, the pruning, the releasing. It wasn't for nothing. It was making room. And now that the room is clear, now that your hands are free, now that your spirit is whole, God can place into your life what couldn't fit before. New connections, new assignments, new joy. Not temporary highs, but sustainable, spirit-breathed purpose. The kind that doesn't drain you, the kind that multiplies what's in you, the kind that confirms, yes, this is what I was made for. So keep moving, even when it's quiet, even when it's misunderstood, even when it's lonely. because you're not walking in circles anymore. You're walking in, and that changes everything. It changes how you show up. It changes who you give your time to. It changes what you tolerate, what you pray for, and how you respond when people leave without explanation. You no longer take silence as a sign of failure. You see it as divine strategy. Because you know now that some things can only be built in the quiet. Some breakthroughs can only come when the crowd clears. And some assignments can only be carried by the version of you that's not addicted to being understood. You've been misunderstood before, and you survived. You've been talked about, left out, and doubted, and you kept walking. Not perfectly, not always confidently, but faithfully. And that faithfulness, even in the dark, even in the ache, even in the confusion, that's what heaven rewards. You're not here because you figured it all out. You're here because you refused to give up. You let God do what only He could do, tear down what was built in fear and rebuild you in truth. That rebuilding took time. It cost comfort. It required a season of stillness most people wouldn't have endured. But you did. And now, here you are, standing on the other side of pain, still tender but stronger than ever. You've learned that endurance isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You've learned to be still without being stagnant, to be quiet without being passive, to be firm without being harsh. You've developed the kind of inner strength that doesn't always speak. It just walks in the room and shifts the atmosphere. You no longer feel the need to explain every step. You don't chase after clarity from people who chose confusion. You don't spend your energy trying to make old relationships fit into a new season. You've learned the lesson. If it costs your peace, it's too expensive. If it demands your compromise, it's not your calling. If it dishonors your growth, it doesn't deserve your presence. Let them misunderstand you. Let them mislabel your peace as pride. Let them confuse your clarity for coldness. You don't need to defend what God has already refined. You don't need to explain the decisions made in obedience. You don't owe anyone access to the parts of you that bled to be made whole. That kind of confidence can't be faked. It comes from fire. From walking through seasons where your prayers were louder than your voice, where your tears watered the ground you now stand on, where your silence wasn't weakness but surrender, a sacred act of letting go so that God could fully take hold. You're no longer trying to be everything to everyone. You're being exactly who you were created to be. That kind of alignment attracts what's real and repels what's not. And when people walk away, you no longer question your worth. You bless them, release them, and keep moving. Because what's ahead is far too important to be delayed by who or what refuses to grow. This path isn't easy, but it's anointed. It's carved by grace, paved with faith, and guided by the Spirit. You won't always see the whole road, but you don't need to. You're not walking alone, you never were. God was there when it broke. He was there in the silence. He was there when no one clapped, when no one called, when no one stayed, and He is still here now. You don't need to fear what's next. You don't need to force what's meant to be. You just need to keep walking, keep showing up, keep trusting that every step taken in obedience is leading you somewhere holy. And when you arrive, when the doors open, when the tables turn, when the harvest comes, you'll remember. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Not with pride, but with reverence. You'll remember the silence that shaped you, the tears that taught you, the loneliness that led you deeper into God's heart. You'll look around and realize this peace, this clarity, this calling, it was worth every misunderstood season, worth every goodbye, worth every moment you felt unseen. Because in the silence, God was speaking, and now so are you. Not with noise, not with defense, not with fear, but with presence, with purpose, with peace. If this message spoke to your heart, I invite you to subscribe and stay connected. This journey of healing, growth, and purpose doesn't end here. It's just beginning. Each video is crafted to remind you of who you truly are and what God has placed within you. So don't walk this path alone. Join this community, share this with someone who needs encouragement today, and let's keep moving forward together. In the next video, we'll go even deeper into truth, into purpose, into peace. You're not alone, and your best days are still ahead. See you then.